During the height of World War II, while millions of soldiers fought with bullets and bombs across Europe, a secret unit of barely 1,000 men waged war with a different kind of weapon: deception. They were artists, actors, engineers, and dreamers who had volunteered to serve their country, only to discover that their most valuable skills had nothing to do with traditional warfare. This is the story of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, known to history as the Ghost Army, whose classified operations remained buried in government files for over 70 years. The story begins not on a battlefield, but in the mind of a British magician named Jasper Maskelyne. In the early days of the war, as German forces swept across North Africa under the command of the brilliant General Erwin Rommel, British forces found themselves outmaneuvered and outgunned in the vast desert expanses of Egypt and Libya. Rommel, known as the Desert Fox for his cunning tactical brilliance, seemed to anticipate every British move, striking where they were weakest and vanishing before reinforcements could arrive. It was then that British military intelligence turned to an unlikely source for assistance. Maskelyne, a stage magician who had built his career on making the impossible seem real, proposed something that many military officers initially dismissed as fantasy. He suggested that the principles of theatrical illusion could be applied to military operations, creating fake armies that would appear real to enemy reconnaissance while hiding the true positions and movements of British forces. Working with a small team of artists and engineers, Maskelyne began constructing elaborate deceptions in the Egyptian desert. Using painted canvas, wooden frames, and ingenious lighting techniques, they created dummy tanks, fake supply depots, and phantom airfields that looked completely convincing from the air. More importantly, they learned to coordinate these visual deceptions with false radio traffic and carefully choreographed movements that would sell the illusion to German intelligence officers studying reconnaissance photographs and intercepted communications. The success of these early experiments caught the attention of military planners in both London and Washington. If a small team of magicians and artists could fool one of Germany's most capable generals, what could a larger, more sophisticated deception unit accomplish? The concept was revolutionary. Instead of simply trying to hide military operations, they would actively mislead the enemy, creating false realities that would draw German forces away from actual Allied objectives. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, American military intelligence was grappling with similar challenges. As the United States prepared for its inevitable entry into the European theater, planners recognized that successful invasion would require more than just superior numbers and firepower. They needed to achieve tactical surprise, to land forces where the Germans least expected them, and to prevent enemy reserves from concentrating against Allied beachheads during the critical first hours of any invasion. The concept of organized military deception was not entirely new to American forces. During the Civil War, both Union and Confederate armies had used various forms of misdirection and camouflage. But the scale and sophistication required for modern warfare demanded an entirely new approach. Military leaders began to envision specialized units that could create convincing illusions of entire army divisions, complete with realistic equipment, authentic radio communications, and all the logistical signatures that enemy intelligence would expect to detect. In early 1943, the War Department issued a classified directive authorizing the formation of what would officially be designated the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. The unit's true mission was so sensitive that even its name was deliberately misleading. To anyone not cleared for the program, they appeared to be just another headquarters unit responsible for routine administrative and logistical functions. In reality, they were being assembled to wage psychological warfare on an unprecedented scale. The recruitment process for the Ghost Army was unlike anything the military had attempted before. Instead of seeking experienced soldiers or recent graduates from military academies, recruiters visited art schools, theaters, advertising agencies, and engineering firms. They were looking for individuals with very specific skills: the ability to visualize three-dimensional objects from two-dimensional plans,
experience with large-scale construction and fabrication, knowledge of electronics and radio technology, and most importantly, the creative imagination to think beyond conventional military doctrine. Among the first recruits was a young fashion designer named Bill Blass, who would later become one of America's most celebrated clothing designers. At the time of his enlistment, however, he was simply a talented young man with an eye for detail and a gift for understanding how visual elements could be combined to create powerful impressions. Alongside him came former Broadway set designers, commercial artists, radio engineers, and recent graduates from some of the country's most prestigious art and engineering programs. The initial training for these unconventional soldiers took place at Camp Forest in rural Tennessee, far from prying eyes and potential security leaks. The recruits were organized into several specialized companies, each responsible for different aspects of the deception mission. The 603rd Engineer Camouflage Battalion would handle the construction and deployment of dummy equipment. The Signal Company would manage false radio communications and electronic warfare. The combat engineers would provide security and handle the more traditional military aspects of their operations. What made the Ghost Army unique was not just their mission, but their approach to that mission. These men understood that effective deception required more than simply building fake tanks and broadcasting false radio messages. They had to create complete, believable narratives that would stand up to intensive enemy scrutiny. Every aspect of their operations had to be coordinated. Visual elements had to match radio signatures. Troop movements had to align with supply requirements, and the entire illusion had to evolve over time in ways that enemy analysts would find logical and convincing. The technical challenges they faced were enormous. The Army's Quartermaster Corps had experimented with inflatable equipment before, but early prototypes were fragile, unconvincing, and difficult to deploy quickly. Working with engineers from the Goodyear Corporation, the Ghost Army developed new materials and construction techniques that could produce dummy tanks, artillery pieces, and aircraft that were virtually indistinguishable from the real thing when viewed from the distances typical of aerial reconnaissance. These inflatables were marvels of engineering and artistry. A dummy Sherman tank, when properly inflated and positioned, cast shadows identical to those of a real tank, showed the same heat signatures that would be detected by infrared surveillance, and even included details like fake track marks and simulated wear patterns that would convince observers that the equipment had seen extensive use. The inflatables could be transported in standard military trucks and deployed by small teams in a matter of hours, allowing the Ghost Army to create the appearance of massive armored formations almost overnight. But visual deception was only one component of their operations. The Signal Company developed sophisticated techniques for simulating the radio traffic of entire military divisions. They studied the communication patterns of real units, learning how different types of formations coordinated their operations and what kinds of messages would be transmitted at various stages of military operations. Radio operators learned to mimic the transmission styles and procedures of specific units, creating networks of false communications that would appear authentic to enemy signals intelligence.
The Ghost Army also pioneered the use of sonic deception on a scale never before attempted. Working with engineers from Bell Laboratories, they developed powerful sound systems that could project the audio signatures of military operations over distances of several miles. Recordings of tank engines, truck convoys, bridge construction, and troop movements could be broadcast from concealed positions, creating the impression of major military activities in areas where no Allied forces were actually present. As 1943 progressed, the Ghost Army completed their training and prepared for deployment to the European theater. Their first major test would come not in combat, but in the elaborate deception operations designed to support the D-Day landings in Normandy. The success of the Allied invasion depended critically on German forces being positioned to defend the wrong beaches when the actual assault began. The deception plan, known as Operation Fortitude, was one of the most complex and ambitious military deceptions ever attempted. Its goal was to convince German intelligence that the main Allied invasion would target the Pas-de-Calais region of France, rather than the Normandy beaches where the actual landings would take place. To sell this deception, the Allies needed to create the appearance of a massive invasion force assembling in southeastern England, complete with all the logistical infrastructure and communications networks that such a force would require. The Ghost Army played a crucial role in this operation, but they were only one part of a vast deception network that included double agents, false intelligence leaks, and even a phantom army group supposedly commanded by General George Patton. In the fields and forests of Kent and Sussex, Ghost Army teams erected elaborate camps filled with inflatable tanks, dummy landing craft, and fake supply dumps. Radio operators broadcast thousands of messages simulating the communications of divisions that existed only in the imagination of Allied planners. The attention to detail was extraordinary. Fake laundries were established to handle the washing that would be generated by large troop concentrations. Dummy medical facilities, complete with Red Cross markings, were constructed to suggest that planners were preparing for significant casualties. Even recreational facilities were created because German analysts would expect to see evidence that troops were being entertained during the long periods of preparation for invasion. The sonic component of Operation Fortitude was equally elaborate. Hidden speakers broadcast the sounds of intensive military construction along the Dover coast, suggesting that massive port facilities were being built to support the invasion fleet. The recordings included not just the mechanical sounds of construction equipment, but also the human voices and activity that would accompany such large-scale operations. German listening posts along the French coast detected this audio evidence and reported it to their intelligence services as confirmation that invasion preparations were focused on the Dover-Calais route. As June 6, 1944 approached, tension within the Ghost Army reached fever pitch. They knew that the success or failure of their deceptions would be measured not in territory captured or enemy casualties inflicted, but in whether German reserve divisions remained positioned to defend beaches that would never be attacked. The lives of hundreds of thousands of Allied soldiers depended on their ability to maintain convincing illusions until the real invasion forces had established secure footholds in Normandy. When June 6, 1944 finally began, German forces were indeed caught off guard. Elite divisions that should have been positioned to counterattack the Normandy beaches remained in the Pas-de-Calais region, waiting for an invasion that would never come. Even after Allied forces had clearly established themselves in Normandy, German high command continued to believe that the main attack was yet to come, holding back reserves that might have made the difference between Allied success and disaster. The Ghost Army's contribution to D-Day's success was immediately recognized by Allied commanders, but their mission was far from over. As Allied forces advanced across France during the summer and fall of 1944, the Ghost Army was tasked with supporting these operations through continued deception. They created phantom divisions that drew German attention and reserves away from actual Allied objectives, simulated massive buildups in areas where limited forces were actually present, and maintained complex networks of false communications that convinced enemy intelligence of Allied intentions that bore no relationship to actual plans.
One of their most sophisticated operations took place during the crossing of the Rhine River in early 1945. As Allied forces prepared for this final major obstacle before entering the German heartland, the Ghost Army created elaborate deceptions suggesting that multiple crossing attempts would be made at widely separated points along the river. They positioned dummy bridging equipment at false crossing sites, broadcast engineering communications discussing bridge construction at locations where no crossings were planned, and even simulated the sounds of large-scale construction activities to convince German defenders that major operations were underway. The success of these Rhine crossing deceptions was measured in reduced casualties and accelerated breakthrough operations. German forces, spread thin defending multiple false objectives, were unable to concentrate sufficient strength at any single point to stop the Allied advance. Within weeks of the successful crossings, Allied armored divisions were racing across Germany against minimal resistance, hastening the collapse of German resistance and bringing the European war to a more rapid conclusion. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the Ghost Army's service was not their tactical successes, but their ability to maintain operational security throughout the war and for decades afterward. These men carried out some of the most sensitive operations in American military history, often working within miles of German positions, yet the true nature of their mission never became known to enemy intelligence. They understood that their effectiveness depended entirely on secrecy, and they maintained that secrecy with a discipline that professional soldiers would have envied. The personal cost of this secrecy was enormous. Ghost Army veterans returned home after the war unable to discuss their service with family members, friends, or even other veterans. Their discharge papers listed conventional military occupations that bore no relationship to their actual duties. For decades, they watched as other units received recognition and honors for their wartime service, while their own contributions remained buried in classified files. Many took their secrets to their graves, never knowing whether the American people would ever learn of their sacrifices. It was not until the 1990s, more than 50 years after the end of World War II, that the Ghost Army's story began to emerge from the classified archives. Historians studying newly declassified documents discovered references to operations that seemed almost too fantastic to believe. Gradually, surviving veterans began to come forward, finally able to discuss missions that had shaped the course of the war but had never been publicly acknowledged. The story they told revealed a dimension of warfare that most military historians had barely considered. These men had proved that in modern conflict, perception could be more important than reality, that the enemy's beliefs about Allied capabilities and intentions could be manipulated through carefully orchestrated deceptions, and that relatively small investments in psychological warfare could yield strategic dividends far out of proportion to the resources committed. The techniques pioneered by the Ghost Army have continued to influence military thinking long after the end of World War II. Modern military forces routinely employ electronic warfare, information operations, and psychological tactics that trace their origins directly to the innovations developed by artists and engineers in rural Tennessee during the dark days of 1943. The integration of creativity, technology, and strategic thinking that characterized Ghost Army operations has become a standard component of contemporary military doctrine. Their legacy extends beyond their specific contributions to World War II victory. The Ghost Army demonstrated that effectiveness in modern warfare requires more than traditional military virtues of courage, discipline, and tactical skill. It demands the ability to think creatively, to see beyond conventional approaches to military problems, and to understand that the enemy's decision-making process can itself become a target for military operations. The men who served in the Ghost Army were not professional warriors in any conventional sense. They were citizens who volunteered to serve their country and discovered that their civilian skills could be transformed into powerful military capabilities. Their story reminds us that American strength has always derived not just from industrial capacity or technological superiority, but from the creativity and adaptability of ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges. Today, as we face new forms of warfare in cyberspace and information domains, the example of the Ghost Army becomes more relevant than ever. Their understanding that perception and reality are distinct battlefields, that enemy beliefs can be shaped through coordinated influence operations, and that small, highly skilled teams can achieve strategic effects through unconventional means, provides valuable lessons for contemporary military and intelligence professionals. The Ghost Army's story also serves as a reminder of the complexity and moral ambiguity inherent in modern warfare. These men saved countless Allied lives through their deceptions, yet they did so by perfecting the arts of manipulation and misdirection. They fought for democratic values while employing techniques that challenged traditional notions of military honor and straightforward engagement with the enemy. Their service illustrates the difficult choices that democratic societies must sometimes make when confronting totalitarian threats. Perhaps most importantly, the Ghost Army's legacy lies in their demonstration that victory in existential conflicts requires the full mobilization of a society's creative and intellectual resources. The artists, engineers, and dreamers who comprised the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops proved that there is no such thing as a non-essential skill when a free people faces threats to its survival. Their story challenges us to think differently about national defense, about the relationship between military and civilian capabilities, and about the kinds of talents and perspectives that democratic societies must cultivate if they hope to preserve their freedoms in an uncertain world. The Ghost Army served with distinction in a war that determined the future of human civilization. Their weapons were creativity, ingenuity, and an unshakable commitment to the cause of freedom. They fought not with bullets and bombs, but with imagination and deception, proving that sometimes the greatest victories come not from superior firepower, but from superior thinking. Their story, hidden for decades in classified archives, finally stands as testament to the proposition that in the hands of free people, any skill, any talent, any form of human creativity can become a weapon in the defense of liberty.